Kate Woodman, she is our guest artist, and she's also teaching beauty and fashion here at the school this semester. And, you know, we wanted to bring her in to, well, the long story is the students loved her work and the faculty loved her work. And we thought it would be exciting to have her teach a class here. And then, you know, this is back in the summertime as we're trying to figure out how to address this semester where everybody's still kind of in quarantine light, you know, or whatever you'd want to call them, what we're dealing with now. And we were so excited that we began a dialogue with Kate and she was open to doing this. And so her work is, to me, a combination of a number of things. It seems like it has a foot in fantasy, but then it also really has a foot in nostalgia. And then the production of these things is rich and luscious, and they feel like movie posters, and they have that sense of like hyper reality to them. And, you know, it's funny, I got to talk to Kate a little bit as we were trying to hire her, you know, for teaching here this semester. And I remember she said, well, you know, a lot of times photographers say to me, oh, I could make pictures like yours if I had, you know, enormous budgets to do these things. And Kate said, you know, I do most of these things in my house here. And, you know, a lot of the styling, you know, I just kind of, you know, work with the stylist here and do certain things myself, you know. And so I thought that was exciting and that was interesting and all of those things. And so I think rather than me go on and on, let's welcome Kate Woodman to our class today.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro, Timothy. And it's nice to hear kind of the stuff that you're picking up about my work or see in my work, because I think like a lot of artists, it's really difficult. You kind of get like too much into your own work and your own space, and it's hard to like figure out who you actually are. And I think that's what a lot of artists struggle with in like trying to identify and find their style, myself included. But it's nice to see that there are certain themes that do tend to reverberate. Yeah, like nostalgia is a big one.
Yeah.
To me, like the way that I kind of describe my work is I have 3 C's. I have color, conceptual, and cinematic. And those are the kind of 3 traits that I'm always trying to sort of circle back to when I'm creating something. So, you know, if you I did this whole style exercise with my class where you kind of create a list of buzzwords that get you excited about photography and things that, you know, draw you to different types of photographers. And so if you do that and kind of make a short list of these sort of buzzwords, when you go to make your next image, focus on one of those things. And that's going to help you kind of stay true to your interests and your aesthetic and your style.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, is that those 3 words, would you say those are the things in your brain? Because actually those things sounded a bit generic for the way I would describe your work.
Yeah, well, I like to keep it broad so that I don't have to pigeonhole myself into one thing.
Yeah, I guess I thought they were too broad, you know. What would be the other words you think of if you had to like fine tune those words?
Yeah, well, nostalgic is a big one, and I'm glad you picked up on that because for whatever reason, history and nostalgia and this idea of kind of times gone by has always been something that's very fascinating to me. And it's, you know, when I was younger, I studied art history a lot, and I was obsessed with historic architecture and kind of this whole idea of like these worlds gone by that I would never be able to experience firsthand. So there was something that was like kind of fascinating about latching onto that in an artistic way and kind of recreating that to sort of like experience it through my own lens. And so I think that's probably why I keep coming back to sets like this one, which is, you know, kind of more, you know, referential to, you know, the Dust Bowl era, or, I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter what particular time period either. I'm not like, you know, I only like shooting 70s retro, or I only like Victorian era stuff. To me, it's just about kind of exploring a time in the past and sort of bringing it to life.
Oh, and you don't care what era that is necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, with all those things in mind, I did think it was interesting that you did what I'm assuming is a commercial job, and we can get into this later, but that Blockbuster thing,
Yeah.
because the Blockbuster thing is like modern history, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the students here may not even know what a Blockbuster is or was, or
Oh, that's
what
sad.
role it played in all of our lives, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was kind of like the dream job. If my commercial career ends after that job, then it's fine because that was kind of peak for me. Because yeah, I mean, it was they were like, we want something late 80s, early 90s, retro, and I'm like, cool, got it. That's the era that I grew up in, and I'm obsessed with movies and cinematography, and spent a lot of time at Blockbuster as a kid. And then they're like, we want this sort of like Back to the Future-esque style, and we want a lot of color and to make it feel like somewhat fantastical. And I'm like, sign me up, because that just sounds like the perfect job for me. And it's interior stuff, so I love like buildings have been kind of a consistent interest of me throughout my life in various iterations and incarnations. But yeah, more recently I've been focusing a lot on shooting interior spaces, especially of the nostalgic quality. So yeah, that was kind of the perfect meld of all of the things that I enjoy about photography.
You know, it is interesting, and I don't mean to divert this because I know there's probably a way you want to get us into things, you know, but there
By
is this
all means.
idea that I bring up in not this class, but other classes, that is that there's jobs that you're uniquely qualified for. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's ones you could just do, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And yeah, it sounds like the Blockbuster one was the one that you were uniquely qualified for and knew how to make it your own. You know?
Definitely. And, you know, I'd like to say that the majority of the jobs that you get hired for are the ones that are perfectly suited to you, but it's been my experience that that's not necessarily the case.
No, no, no.
But I think that's why it's good to be adaptable and diversify a little bit. And, you know, having a very consistent aesthetic and style is really important, because it will set you up for those kind of dream jobs that are suited to you. But you still have to be able to, you know, pay the bills and do the other things that may not be as glamorous, but they're still valuable. Yeah, I mean, I've been shooting lookbooks for local fashion brands all week, which is not the most exciting stuff, but it's still, I mean, to me, it's still a win. I get to go out, I get to shoot fashion. You know, it's not a high-end couture fashion show, but it's, at the end of the day, it's still creative, and it's still, you know, working with the team and making imagery. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I was more idealistic when I was younger, and I felt like if I
Aren't we
was,
all?
well, kind of, but I think some of it also had to do with, I felt like that if I had to make a picture that wasn't really mine, I would forget how to make my own photo, if that makes any sense. Like I would lose that momentum, you know.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, it's a little easier to compartmentalize, I think, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. To me, it's interesting because I never felt like I had like a distinct niche or thing that I wanted to specialize and focus on. So for me, it was not so much like I need to hone in on this and only do these kind of jobs because that's what I'm interested in doing. For me, it was kind of the opposite. It was like, I want to shoot all of these different things in different genres and different places. And I don't know how to make them all, how to do all of those things and still kind of stay stylistically consistent.
Yeah.
So that, like, the last, 5 years has been kind of exploring how do I bring sort of these commonalities to work in such a broad spectrum of fields. And I think that's kind of going back to that cinematic, color, and conceptual. The reason those are broad is because my interests are so broad, but I can do those things in a very commercial type job, and then I can also do that in like a very fine art conceptual stuff, and those three elements are going to be what sort of link everything together.
No, that's well stated. So before we jump ahead, And I'll let you lead this, but I always think it's interesting to try to understand where a photographer came from. Do you want to talk about like your origin story?
Yeah, sure. Well, like I had mentioned, I've always been kind of interested in art and history, studied art in high school, did a lot of drawing and painting as a kid. Never had any interest in photography when I was younger because to me it wasn't creative. You know, it was like, okay, I'm just going to point my camera at something that already exists. Where's the art in that? Which is something I find incredibly ironic looking back on that these days. But I did have kind of a fairly strong foundation in art. And at the same time, I also really liked math and science. And so my parents are, they're opera singers. My dad was a full-time opera singer. My mom was a singer as well, but she, you know, two freelance opera singers trying to make it work with two kids is like, it's a bit of a challenge. So my mom kind of took the corporate route while my dad continued to work freelance. And so they very much understood the challenges of a freelance lifestyle and how tricky that can be. So when they heard that I was interested in more analytical stuff and things like engineering or architecture, they're like, do that. It has a salary, it pays nice. Don't become a freelance artist. Yeah. So I kind of went off in that direction, and I actually ended up getting my degree in structural engineering, but I also majored in art history as well. So I never really, I always kind of maintained interest in art. And in grad school, the two kind of came together. So my master's is in historic preservation, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically kind of the restoration of historic structures, buildings particularly for me. So I was able to sort of incorporate this love for historic architecture and then also sort of this analytical process that I enjoyed in a way that, you know, kind of seamlessly melded together.
Yeah.
And I thought that, you know, that was it. I figured out what I wanted to do in life, and I was going to restore all of these historic buildings. And I did have a lot of cool opportunities to work in that field. I actually worked on some restoration work for the US Capitol building. I was working in Philly at the time. We did a lot of restoration work on some historic buildings there. I worked for a building conservation company where we did a lot of more like interior stuff, where it was like restoring a cool old fireplace, or like the ceiling of the Nemours mansion in Delaware, and more like meticulous hands-on kind of stuff too, which I actually really enjoyed, probably about as much as the analysis aspect too. So there's always this kind of tangible thing that I really enjoyed doing, that the engineering side didn't really allow for.
Right.
So I was in Philly for grad school, and my husband and I bought this old house, this old farmhouse that was built like in the 1770s, and it was this hideous old lady special. It had like salmon pink wallpaper and cabinets that were like bubblegum pink, and shag carpet from the 70s. It was one of those things where I wish that I had the same kind of interest of shooting interiors then as I do now, because it would have made the best set for some like ridiculous nostalgic thing. But of course I never did any of that. But we did spend a lot of time restoring it and trying to be very conscious of, you know, the integrity of the structure and making it feel kind of reminiscent of historic, but still kind of, you know, livable in today's world of internet and TV and, you know, all those modern amenities. So during this whole process, I got really into interior design, really into, you know, just building interiors in general, and did a ton of research into design and a lot into color. And so I think this is really where kind of my interest in color started to blossom, because I would, I think I painted every room in the house and had to come up with like the right color scheme for the walls and the furniture and the decor and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I painted one hallway like 3 different shades of yellow over and over again, because I couldn't get it right, because like in the morning the color would look one color, and then in the afternoon with different light it would look another color. I think my husband was going to kill me, but finally got it right. But yeah, I mean, like at that point I think I was kind of unknowingly preparing myself for, you know, this study in color theory and in design, that became really kind of integral into the photography that I would create later. Although at the time I hadn't, I mean, I barely had picked up a camera at this point.
So there's no photography going on. You weren't a
None.
hobbyist, and you weren't like the camera club person or anything like that.
No, the only time that I really photographed anything at this point was I studied abroad in Venice, Italy, for a couple months in college, and I brought my camera to just kind of take pictures of travels at that point. Ironically, I think I lost most of my pictures from that trip, so clearly it wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it was something that I sort of enjoyed doing at the time, but when I got back, I kind of put the camera away and forgot about it. And didn't really see any purpose for it, because when you travel and you're seeing new things and you're experiencing all this like cool art and architecture that you studied and were so interested in all this time, then yeah, you document it. But when you come back home and everything is stuff you've already seen before, you know, what's the point?
Right. Right.
So I didn't actually really start thinking about photography until I think it was 2011. I got called into my boss's office in my engineering firm, and he was like, so there have been a couple pretty bad earthquakes down in Christchurch, New Zealand, and we're setting up an office down there, kind of an emergency task force to do building damage assessment. We want to get a team together. Do you want to go? And I was like, why not? And he's like, cool, you leave tomorrow for 6 months.
Oh, seriously? Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So I was like, well, okay, this is happening. Why not? I'm like very much the plan 5 years ahead for everything in my life person, but you know,
Yeah.
it just felt like the thing that I needed to do. And I hadn't really traveled a whole lot. It was a place that, you know, I didn't know a whole lot about either, but I was like, you know, they filmed Lord of the Rings there. Can't be that terrible. So,
right.
Yeah, so went down for about 6 months, and I think there were about 8 or 10 of us, mostly from the US, and it was a great experience for a lot of reasons. One, for the type of work, you know, it was meaningful. It was like doing damage assessment of these buildings. It was helping the community. But it was also a great group of people to go down, because they're all kind of, you know, if you're the type of person that's willing to kind of put your life on hold for 6 months, travel to another country, then generally speaking, you're the type of person that's up for like going and exploring and going on adventures and that sort of thing. So the group of us kind of formed a fairly tight-knit friendship, and we spent basically every single moment of our free time going out and exploring different parts of the country. And so, of course, I brought my camera for this because, again, it's documenting travels. It's, you know, making everyone back home jealous because you're in the middle of these epic mountain landscapes, and you can't take a bad photo there because everything is just so beautiful. So over the course of the 6 months, I was like more and more compelled to take photos and more interested. And kind of towards the end of my trip, I started to get more interested in like kind of doctoring these photos up and making them look more presentable and more intriguing. So I was using like Windows Paint or Windows like Picture Viewer and like cranking up contrast and saturation and like totally destroying the integrity of these images.
Yeah.
As you do. And they looked, you know, not that exciting, but the following year, I actually went back again for another short stint. And this time I was prepared. I had like started to get more interested in the processing part of photography. So I started like looking up Lightroom tutorials on YouTube or Creative Live or that sort of thing, and started to kind of just play around with some of that imagery. And then next time I went down, I had more of kind of a game plan of like, okay, well, I'm not just going to like willy-nilly take pictures. I'm going to focus on composition, and I'm going to go out in the mornings or at sunset to make sure that the light looks really nice.
But still, you were just taking pictures, though. You weren't making pictures. Like, you weren't setting something up with a friend or like bringing a quote model who was just your friend. You weren't. It was all just stuff that was out there, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, let me just share my screen here because I've got some photos from
for sure
that stuff. So can you see that?
Oh yeah. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, so this is kind of the state of the destruction in New Zealand that we were documenting. So this was the other part of the photography, was photo documentation, and kind of, you know,
oh my goodness,
all of this damage and documenting it and writing field reports. So there was a very kind of clinical process for photography here, but then there was also, you know, the fun stuff.
Well, these are kind of amazing pictures, though, don't you think? I mean, like,
yeah, well,
with all the broken stuff in the graphics, like, there's something going on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, kind of going through a couple of these, I was like, that's actually kind of an interesting composition. And like, I totally did this accidentally, but maybe there's something there.
You said that then, or you're saying that now?
Well, I think kind of towards the end of that, I was like, maybe I'm onto something here.
Oh, okay. No, for sure.
This is my crazy team that we climbed glaciers. Like, this is the kind of stuff that we did, you know, just go climb a glacier.
Oh, wow.
So.
Oh, wow. Oh, so you saw amazing things. I mean, I was unfamiliar with what it's like there. You know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So this is like early pictures, not very exciting, but like the landscape's pretty, so it looks super cool.
It does. So you're
like
digital.
Most of these are just.
You have like a DSLR or something like that?
I had like a Lumix little. It wasn't a DSLR. It was like a glorified point and shoot. So it was like somewhere kind of in between the two, where it was like slightly better than a point and shoot, but not quite. So this was like year 2 that I was down there, where I was like, I'm going to focus on sunsets and sunrises and landscapes and all that stuff, and all of these colors, and like cranking saturation, because more is more when it comes to color, which, to be fair, that part hasn't changed much, really. I think I'm a little more nuanced with how I address color, but I still quite like it.
Well, you know, it's funny looking at quantities. Yeah, I mean, looking at the sky in this photograph, it starts to look like, you know, your Blockbuster ad or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there is a thread there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this was, so year 2 was when I kind of started really getting interested in photography. And at this point, it was pretty much all landscape. And then when I wasn't in New Zealand and I was back home again, I kind of put the camera down and didn't really do too much. But after year 2, after I came back after the second time, I was like, you know what, this is something I enjoy doing. I know I can't shoot these types of landscapes in Philadelphia, but what else can I do? Sorry, just cycle through a few more of these. If no one's been there, you should go, because it's absolutely amazing. So the pictures from here on out are actually from 2015, which was the last time I was there And so in between 2011 and 2015, which I'll get into in a second, I took, I did quite a lot of other photography and like took some time to kind of develop my skills, but landscape was something that I always kind of came back to, and still do. I still really enjoy shooting landscape. And, you know, at the early stages, I liked shooting it, but I knew like commercially it wasn't really going to be that viable. So it was like, you know, it's a fun thing to do on the side, but it's really just for me at this point. And then kind of later on is when I started exploring more composite photography, which I'll talk about more in a bit, but it was a way to sort of actually start integrating some of those landscape images that I had taken. So you can see that my post-processing skills have improved slightly between 2011 and 2015.
So are these composites, or are they
No,
panoramas, or what's happening?
no, none of these are composites. This is all just probably some heavy color grading in some of these, but it's all kind of in situ. So this is what it looks like down there. This was my favorite thing. We did a plane, like a biplane tour over the Southern Alps, which is the big mountain range down there. And there's this lake, which is this color blue, which is crazy.
Oh, wow.
But it was a really cool experience. So when I got back in 2012, I was like, all right, I can't do these landscapes here. What else can I do? And my husband had actually bought an off-camera flash, like the Strobist beginner kit. So it's like one flash, a light stand, and a shoot-through white umbrella.
Yeah.
And so I used my cello as my prop and literally just like practiced every different lighting configuration and orientation, like with the light, with the bare ball, with the umbrella on, without it, different orientations of the light, just to kind of like practice and learn about off-camera flash. And
so what was inspiring this though? Were you watching YouTube, or did you have a friend who was a studio photographer, or like?
well, I didn't know any photographers at this point. I think early on I was just when I'm like interested in something, I just like commit to it and like scour the web, scour YouTube, buy all the books. And I think one thing that has been consistent for me is I very much I have to do it in order to learn. And so when I got interested in this stuff, I really wanted to just practice it and just keep experimenting and trying new things. And I tried everything. So like this is, you know, a Smirnoff bottle that I saw some YouTube video of like using foam core to like flag off light and create these like strips of light on the side. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Maybe I'll try and play around with that, and just like followed tutorial videos and did that for a hot second with my really terrible watermark. But once I kind of got a sense for flash photography, I was like, okay, what do I want to do? And I got really interested by the whole concept of like beauty and cosmetic photography. Yeah. And like, how do you make these models look like they have perfect skin? And like, I know after having practiced this enough time with the flash, like that's not just the camera itself. Like there's magic behind this. There's some trick for them to make it look like there's this like beyond perfect quality to it. And so at this point I was like, I need to learn Photoshop, because that's how they do it. I don't know how they do it yet, but I'm going to find out. So this kind of started my fascination with Photoshop, and particularly with like beauty and skin retouching is kind of where it started. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm the type of person that could spend like 8 hours on one beauty image and like just dodge and burn like this and like not get tired of it. I know there are some photographers who absolutely can't stand it, but I just like get so immersed in it that I can't stop, and I love it. So,
Wow.
which is probably why I spend, you know, a lot of my stuff is very Photoshop heavy, sort
Oh,
of.
lots of post production is part of your vocabulary.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not to say that it all is. A lot of stuff is in camera, but you know, for me, it's kind of the thing that takes it from something that any photographer can do to something that like puts kind of my aesthetic stamp on it.
Right.
The icing on the cake, as it were. So this is like one of my very first shoots with a model. I found my makeup artist on Model Mayhem. I found my model on Craigslist. We all chatted a bit beforehand to make sure that we weren't, you know, creepy axe murderers or anything like that, because, you know, it's the internet. And this was the first shoot that we did together. And at this point, I was also very interested in gels and bringing in that color again to images. So I have like a purple gel kind of on one side of her face here. And then I was like, I got a beauty dish, you know, because you need a beauty dish to shoot beauty. So shot that. I think it was, you know, the beauty dish setup. At this point, I'd gotten another off-camera flash for the gelled part. And so, yeah, this was kind of the start of the beauty stuff. And
So the makeup is such a big thing,
yeah,
though, in your work in general, and then say in this, and then it looks like the stuff you're looking at that you were sharing, a lot of that comes from not just special effects makeup, but just really good makeup, you know, tasteful makeup.
yeah.
Are you working with someone, or are you doing it yourself, or how are you doing it?
Oh, I can do anything on set except makeup. I'm completely useless when it comes to makeup. Hair, fine, I can do that in a pinch, but if you give me a makeup brush, I'm gonna run.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically since day one, since I started photographing people, I have almost always had a makeup artist on set or a model that is capable of doing their own makeup, because it is a skill set that is beyond me. I have no interest in it either. Aside from, you know, I like to retouch it, but I don't apply it. I mean, I never wear makeup. So, but yeah, obviously if you want to shoot beauty, you need to have a team that understands that.
Yeah, I always think of it as that is the like secret weapon that photographers have to learn to embrace. You know, like it is the kind of underestimated thing with smaller jobs. You have to convince the client that you need these things, and like it is the kind of secret weapon. You know?
Yeah, I was just on a lookbook shoot yesterday where the models were friends of the producer and were told to come makeup ready, which given the current environment is understandable, but you know, definitely I'm very spoiled in the fact that I have a number of makeup artists that I work with who are so incredibly talented, and they make my life so easy that when you don't have that, you're like, oh. So,
no, it's a big deal for sure.
It is.
One thing I wanted to share with the class is, students, I would encourage you, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll find time to, you know, bring them up. And you know, everyone in this class has come up with questions, you know what I mean, based on your work, but I just want to kind of manage that a little bit.
Yeah, sounds great.
Especially now that we're getting into the kind of more technical things where they may, you know, have these things.
Yeah, please ask away.
So it's interesting. Oh, you mentioned Model Mayhem and everything. What era is this? Like 2013 or so?
Yeah. Which 7 years ago now. It's wild.
I think we've all used Model Mayhem. Is it still a thing? Does it still exist?
I don't know. To be honest, I think that most Model Mayhem is great for people kind of starting out as just kind of a point to get their name out there. And I think a lot of people, once their portfolio has developed a little bit more, they tend to kind of graduate out of Model Mayhem. But that being said, most of the people that are on there, like my profile is still up there. It hasn't been updated in like 6 years. So you can still find me on there. So it's still kind of a good resource just to get a sense of like who's around. To me these days, like the way that I network with new people is all through Instagram. So that's kind of the preferred marketing technique in terms of finding new people. But that being said, I think you can still use Model Mayhem as a resource, but I have not been on it in many, many years. So
yeah, no, I haven't in a long time. But yeah, it was always important for me to figure out how to connect with these internet connections. I needed a way to solidify the deal more, you know what I mean, and make everybody feel accountable. You know, this is a real shoot. We're really doing this. So
sorry, my light is either too bright or I'm red here, so
we'll fit it into the lecture. No, that's good.
Yeah, so beauty was like, okay, now I'm gonna do this. Like I really was interested in the sort of like clean and clear cover girl type.
Oh, you really got it there. Yeah.
Sometimes the makeup was a little over the top. The thing is that when I started working with makeup artists, they weren't always the best makeup artists, which, you know, to learn retouching is actually not the worst thing, because you have to do a lot more work and you have to really pay attention to detail in order to fix things that are not great. So, you know, I kind of like to approach life in general as like, you know, make lemonade out of lemons, right? Like if you have a situation that's not ideal, what can you learn from it? How can you grow from it? You know, how can you take this experience and make it useful to yourself? So that was kind of my experience in general with models and makeup artists starting out. And I think that's super common, right? Because everyone's kind of elevate together, and you start off with maybe not, you know, the most ideal resources, but then as you grow, everyone kind of grows. And I learned a lot about posing. I learned a lot about lighting through years of mistakes and not shooting the best stuff. So, you know, I think those experiences are important to go through.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
So yeah, beauty, more beauty. And then at some point I was introduced to the work of Annie Leibowitz. I think probably through my friend Felix Kuhns. He's a photographer that teaches a lot, and he's taught through Creative Live, and he used to assist for Annie. So I think it was through his Creative Live class that I was kind of introduced to her work. Mm-hmm. But, you know, she's like the cream of the crop, and she's this like powerful woman in photography, and she creates these really like painterly kind of images. And for me, coming from a background of classic art, you know, painting and drawing and that stuff, that aesthetic really appealed to me. So I was like, oh, so I can make photography look kind of like a painting.
Oh yeah,
that's cool, sign me up. So I bought a piece of canvas and like drug it to my basement and painted it with like latex paint so I could make my own kind of hand painted Oliphant type backdrop. And I hung it up in a room in my house, and basically it just lived hanging up in that space for the next couple of years. And I shot a ton of stuff trying to basically emulate Annie. So, you know, that kind of like classic studio portrait. And at this point, I just wanted to shoot in studio stuff against, you know, this background, and, you know, sort of explore this sort of fashion meets portrait kind of thing. But, you know, the beauty sort of evolved more into fashion. And then I started working with more designers and kind of making connections with stylists. And so kind of getting into sort of the fashion realm there.
So you're living where at this time?
I'm in Philly still.
Oh, okay. So you still have like your day job and stuff?
Oh yeah. Working, you know, my 8-hour days, and then coming home and on weekends doing shoots or evenings doing shoots. neglecting my social life and my family. But
Where in Philly?
well, I actually lived in Media, so a couple, like 10 miles west of Philly, but I worked right in Rittenhouse Square.
Oh, cool. I used to go to college in Philadelphia.
Oh, nice. Where'd you go?
Moore College of Art and Design.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Philly.
Yeah, no, I lived in Pennsylvania for a while going to college at Penn State. So you have a studio set up in your basement and that's where all these are done, or were you doing like where?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I set up a room in my house and that was kind of like the dedicated studio space. And I think I had a couple lights, but most of it was shot like a large kind of like 36-inch octabox directional light. It was kind of very formulaic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think I got some decent images and I learned a lot about post-processing and how to kind of get that painterly aesthetic. But in terms of like lighting, I wasn't really pushing myself as much as I was towards the beginning of things.
So you're in a basement though, shooting with a strobe? I mean, with a 10 foot.
Well, I painted my backdrop in the basement and then I brought it upstairs to my.
Oh, okay. So you had high ceilings, or I mean,
No, it was a very kind of like claustrophobic space. There was a lot of depth to the room, but it wasn't very wide. And, we were in an older house, so the ceilings weren't particularly high.
Right.
So yeah, it's really just kind of like making as much as you can out of a very small space. So one of the things that I did a lot of was like extending backdrops in Photoshop or like making the scene feel bigger. So learning kind of those tips and tricks to sort of make your space feel a little bit bigger than it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So this job, these few images here were really kind of a turning point for me because I hadn't really shot a lot of stuff on location, but I knew that I liked these kinds of spaces. And on location lighting was always a bit intimidating to me because I felt like I could light the subject or I could get a shot of the space, but they never really worked together. And if I lit the subject, then there would be too much light fall off and I couldn't get kind of the light in the space that I needed. Yeah. And especially looking at someone like Annie's work, who has such a great balance between like the ambient light in a space and the light on a model.
Yeah.
It was like, there's no way I could do that. But this was a fun editorial that I did with a friend of mine who's a hair and makeup artist, and we found this model, and my makeup artist had a designer friend who made these like amazing, these are actually made of zippers. This whole like piece that she's wearing is made of zippers. So, she had this whole collection to shoot, and we were like, let's just do something weird and different. And she was somehow connected with the owner of this taxidermy shop in like South Philly. So it's just like a weird space, and the model's kind of quirky too. So I'm like, we have all the components to make something really interesting here. Let's just see what we can do. And brought her into the space and just kind of took the chance of using light on location and, maybe not sticking with the same formula of, you put the light here, but actually moving it around and playing with, kind of adjusting the light to sort of hit everything the right way. And this is kind of what we got. And this is a one light setup, so it's not like it's super complex, but it was the first time that I felt some kind of confidence in being able to actually put someone in a scene that's more than just a backdrop and to get something that was visually interesting. And then all of the other elements in terms of the styling really came together in the shoot as well. So it was kind of like a happy accident for me.
Yeah.
But in a way it was, I don't know, in a way it was both parts like exciting because it was like, oh, okay, I'm onto something here. But then it was like, well, that was just an accident and I don't even know how I did it. So how am I going to be able to replicate this?
So So at the time, you were not like into layers where you do an exposure for like the room and an exposure for the subject and then layering those things. It was about getting it in camera, essentially.
Right. And I did not also know that a lot of, my idol's work was done in that fashion where, she'll do an exposure for the background and then come in with a, assistant has a light stand that's posited out. It like it looks so effortless, right? But when you actually break it down, there's a lot of complexity to it. And I couldn't understand that, previously when I tried to create that kind of stuff, it just wouldn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
So still you have no contemporaries who are photographers.
I didn't really, I think I started kind of getting engaged with the online community at that point, but in terms of other local photographers, I didn't really have that many people that I engaged with on a local level. Being in Portland now, that's definitely different, and I definitely took some steps in order specifically to engage with local photographers. But in Philly, the community was not developed in that way. It was kind of like every man for himself.
Yeah.
And it didn't. I think because it's so close to New York that anyone who's serious about photography tends to go up to New York and kind of work in that market rather than staying in Philly. So it wasn't really that big of a photo market, at least based on my kind of interactions with people.
Right.
And I was doing it for 2 years in Philly before we moved anyway. So, at that point I was just focusing on like getting my own stuff together and figuring out how it works for me and not so much focused on the community aspect of it at that point.
Right. No, that makes sense. I just remember it was like I had an earlier career as like a photojournalist. And then when I started to do kind of commercial work and editorial work, it was the first time I started to use assistants. And the assistants seemed to know other photographers and they knew other things. And suddenly I felt like I went from isolated to the network of knowledge or something like that, and I'm wondering when that happened with you, if it did ever happen.
No, it didn't really. I mean, for one thing, I was so used to doing everything myself that the idea of delegating tasks out was not something that I,
cool. Yeah,
it's kind of like I would spend more time teaching someone else, but at the same time, like I didn't know what I was doing either. It was all experimentation. So like how helpful can I be to someone who wants to learn under me? Like I just didn't think I was ready for that at that point. And the idea of learning from someone else didn't seem that appealing because the only photographers that I really admired were like way up here and not necessarily locally either. So I just was like, I'm going to do it all myself. And I know part of this is just a personality thing where I don't want to inconvenience anyone else, which I think is a big portion of why I do a lot of composite stuff, is because rather than like schlepping a whole team on site somewhere at 2:00 in the morning so you can get hair and makeup ready for a sunrise, it's like, well, I'll just get the sunrise photo and we can shoot comfortably in studio and make it quick and easy for everyone. So there's certainly that aspect of my personality too that kind of played into that.
Yeah. No, I could relate to those feelings for sure.
But I think it's interesting because I feel like since I don't know how much it predated my entry into the photo community, but I feel like with the advent of platforms like Creative Live or Kelby One or ProEDU, where we have these kind of communities virtually online, my photo network has really evolved that way versus, the assistant mentor relationship, which I think was very much, the way to do things prior to the internet age and online education of photography. But once that started, it really kind of changed the whole dynamic of how you network and how you make these connections.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
So this is my other kind of like turning point image for me, which this was shot the day before I left for New Zealand for the third time in 2015, right when we were moving away from Philly. We decided we were going to leave Philly and go to Portland. And then, you know, right as we were making that decision, my boss was like, hey, can you go back to New Zealand for another 6 months? So we packed everything, shipped it across country. I went to New Zealand. My husband went to Portland. Then he came to meet me for 3 months and then went back to Portland. Anyway, but yeah, this was like kind of the last hurrah where I was like, this was a model I'd worked with a bunch of times before who I loved and my kind of normal hair and makeup artist. And I was like, let's just do something fun without like, let's not think about it too much. We'll just get together and have a play date. And this was a field about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes from my house. And I'd spent some time at the Wyeth Museum in Chadsford.
Yeah.
And was like, let's do this kind of like Christina's World type thing where she's like this farm girl in a dress, and brought her out to this field. And at the time, the cloud cover was like very variable. And so it was like going in and out. The sun was going in and out. And like in like 10 seconds, you got like drastically different types of light quality. And I just happened to kind of click this at this perfect moment where there was just enough diffusion over the sun to make it sort of this like perfect light quality. And the wind picked up and she was just kind of like blinked for a second or something. And I was like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And like this to me was kind of like, this visually feels like that cinematic kind of quality, but also has kind of a commercial type of style to it. I mean, I don't know if I'm really describing that well, but you know, it just had kind of a quality about it that I was like, I've been trying to get that, but I don't know how to do it. And again, kind of a happy accident.
Yeah, you know, let's turn this to the students here, because I like what you were saying there. Like, it felt, you're kind of saying like it felt commercial, but you didn't really know why. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, why would we say this? Let's turn it to the students a little bit here. Like, what feels commercial about this? Even though
contrast feels very commercial. The fact that it's very hard lighting on her. I was actually wanting to ask, did you use one light, since you kind of described it as like, oh, let's go have fun or whatever?
Yeah, my light was the sun.
Oh, no, so it was just the sun and a reflector, or?
Nope, we just kept it like super minimum. You know, figure we'd just do some outfit changes and run around. So I didn't even pack any lighting for this.
Yeah, that's surprising, because it does look like a reflector filled in all the shadows and caressed that fabric to make it look all textural. But no, that was good, Marcy. Let's hear from someone else as well. Why does this look commercial?
I think it looks very, like, it looks like what we did in class the other day when we were stitching, and it just looks like a big thing that would go on like a big board, like a perfume commercial or something for like Chloe. And like, this has a vibe, and like I could see this being like for like a high-end brand or something. It's just super like, everything about it seems perfected or like perfectly imperfect, and it's like it just all seems super like intentional. Like this whole shot, it seems intentional.
Definitely, yeah. The epic landscape feels how it's either you cropped it or you shot it as a panorama, or however you did it there, Kate. Yeah,
I think this was cropped.
Okay, that seems like billboard proportions or something like that, you know. But then, well, let's hear from someone else, because I do like pointing out that the things to make something look commercial don't always cost $1 million. It's just decisions, really.
So for me, I think that the lighting has a lot to do with it. Whenever I think of commercial, I think of something that's evenly lit in a way where it could easily show off the product that's being sold or displayed. Also, the space of the image, I feel, plays an important part because of the amount of space that's around the subject. I think that leaves enough room for text or something like that that could be placed on the image in post to advertised by words for a specific product or something.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, no, it does look like it has like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna have to put the shot of the Pepsi bottle in there somewhere, and then we need the, you know, the other thing. What I was thinking was that the clothing, the intention of the clothing and how beautiful that clothing is and how it seems to fit with whatever idea there is behind the photo, that goes a long way with this. That becomes the production, I think, you know. But then
Yeah.
she did her own makeup, or she just was beautiful, or what? I mean, because it looks
No,
like
I had someone do her hair and makeup for this.
She did.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, to me, I think Shane kind of hit it on the head as far as my perception of it, because I think when I think of commercial imagery, there is kind of like, there's a sharpness to it, and there's this sort of balance of light so that every detail is pronounced, right? Like you're not losing detail in the shadow. The highlights aren't blown out. It's really well balanced. And it almost, in some ways, not for this image, but for a lot of commercial work in general, almost in like a clinical way, where it's like everything has to be so technically perfect. Whereas in like editorial work, I feel like you have a lot more room for drama and romance and imperfection, whereas commercial work, like it has to be kind of spot on. The copy is an interesting point too, because I've often wondered with my work that kind of transcends different categories that, you know, some people have a problem identifying where it should go, right? Or where it belongs. Like, is it commercial? Is it fashion? Is it conceptual? And I've often toyed with the idea of just like making up copy and putting it on there just to be like, it's an ad for something. And then it would, I guarantee you, if I did that and showed it to the same art director, they would be like, oh yeah, totally, I could see that.
oh yeah, yeah. No, I do have a friend who shoots kind of lifestyle imagery, but it's not cheesy. It's very real. And if anything, it can look a little rough. And his rep told him, well, no, you got to put logos on the thing so it feels like an outtake from a shoot for Google or an outtake for a shoot from Bank of America or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it allows them to make the leap that this is something kind of feels like an outtake from a big commercial shoot. You know,
100%. And you would be, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but some of the students might be surprised at how uncreative creative directors can be sometimes, and how much they need things spelled out to them in terms of like where this fits and what bucket this falls in, or what category this falls in.
Yes, it's very.
It's been my experience, but
yeah, when you see behind the curtain, sometimes it's very disappointing. But we don't want to fill their heads with those bitter, jaded commentary about the industry. I do like the idea, though, of stumbling upon an early image that suddenly feels commercial, you know, and because as a photographer, I'm a big believer that a lot of times we make some important images in our trajectory by accident.
100%.
And then have to figure out how to chase that image and make others that are like that, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
And, yeah, so I didn't want to pause on here too much, but yeah, I think it's interesting when suddenly there is that turning point image.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And this, I mean, to this day, this is still one of my favorite images. And sometimes, like, I think about all of the things that I do in order to, you know, create this high production value vibe, and you know, all the thought process that goes into the mood board and the planning and the styling and all this stuff. And it's like, I shot this in 5 minutes with no plan, and it's still one of my favorite images. So to me, it's always a good reminder that, you know, to, first of all, to have those days where you go out kind of without a plan and just enjoy making art for the sake of making art and not overthink it too much.
Yeah.
But also, that if you understand concept and you understand lighting, that you can create something out of nothing, as long as it has those elements that make it compelling. And those elements don't have to be expensive.
Right.
They just have to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is well stated. There was another guest artist we had whose work was radically different than both yours and mine and every student here's. And she had this theory where she was like, there was a phase where I wanted everything to look as professional as possible. And now I'm at the point where it needs to look just good enough to be acceptable. And there was something that rang true about that, not in terms of your stuff, but that idea of that there is sometimes when you maybe get to a certain point where you can control it and it's not by default, the idea of having something look rough and accessible is key too, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and you know, I mentioned this thing about some images in the commercial realm looking very clinical. And I think you can have all of the technical elements in a scene go right, but if there's no story behind it, or there's no substance to it, or there's no kind of emotional tie, then what's the point?
That's a good point. Yeah, sometimes these things are intangibles and they're hard to grasp and they're hard to know when you're getting them and not getting them too.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, this was definitely one of those aha moments for me.
Yeah.
So after that was the day before I went to New Zealand. Then I got to New Zealand and I was like, you know, I'm going to start trying to shoot with agency models now, because it's a smaller market in Christchurch than it was in Philly. And I developed a relationship with an agency there, and they were like, yeah, we'll just send you kind of all our girls to test with. And I didn't have a studio at this point. So I was like, okay, I have no choice but to kind of just make the space that I'm in work. And so, you know, some of it was like shoot against the white wall, or just do kind of beauty stuff so that I don't have to worry about, you know, what space I'm in. But then it was like, well, I have this space that has really beautiful light. I'm going to make use of that. I'm going to start incorporating my models into the scene a little bit more, and maybe kind of go more this lifestyle route, but really just like experimenting with different kind of scenes and different lighting configurations, and kind of taking myself outside the box of, okay, you have one studio light and that's that, but now let's kind of open things up and see where we go with this.
So what was your goal at this time? Were you like, did you want to be a professional? If someone interviewed you then, would they say like, do you want to be a commercial photographer? Or would you be like, I just like playing with my camera, you know, like? Yeah,
I think at this point, right when we decided to go to New Zealand, I was already sort of dabbling with what's going to be the plan, because we'd already talked about moving. We were going to make a cross-country switch. I was going to have to find a new job anyway. I typically have like a 2-year attention span for new things. And if I'm still interested after 2 years, then I know it's something that's there to stay. And it had been about 3 years into my photography journey at this point, and I was even more excited about it than I was when I started. So I was like, you know, this isn't something that's going to go away.
Yeah.
And so I knew that it's something I wanted to continue, and it was getting to the point where it was eating up a lot of my time, and really kind of taking its toll on, you know, this work-life balance thing. So at that point, kind of earlier on in the year, I was already kind of on the fence about whether I wanted to make a full-time career swap. And then kind of throughout the year, it sort of worked itself out, you know, that I had some discussions with my company about, you know, working remotely, and that kind of got turned down. And then, you know, had more and more experience shooting with these agency models, and got paid to do the agency tests, and also was able to put away a fair amount of per diem that I was getting for being in New Zealand. So financially, I had set myself up to be able to make that transition and have a bit of a buffer in case, you know, I wasn't, you know, financially successful right away, which no one wants to talk about that stuff because it's not fun. But the reality is, like, if you want to get into a career, you have to set yourself up for a success, and that includes financially too, right? It costs money to start a business, and especially if you're in a new city, you have to network and you have to spend time and money testing, and you're not going to be profitable right away. So I think kind of by the end of my trip, I was like, I could go get an engineering job, but I think this is something that I really want to do. And my husband was like, yeah, we're switching everything anyway, so let's just go for it and see what happens.
That's neat.
Yep.
Interesting.
So this was one of the first shoots I did back in Portland. So end of Halloween 2015, I got back to the States and kind of hit the ground running, and have been a full-time freelance photographer since.
Oh, wow. So that was the break. That was how you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately began shooting large ad campaigns.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
To me, it's always very, like, there's a class we're trying to teach the students, which is, we're trying to get it approved, which is about like the first year out. You know what I mean? Like how to stay focused your first year out, what to expect your first year out, how to spend your time, the first year out. Do you have any tales from that time where suddenly it's like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could write a novel on what not to do your first year of business.
That, absolutely. Oh, no, we have a lot of stories like that. What would be one thing, what's not to do?
Well, one of the things that I did my first year was I signed up with agency access, and I paid for like a photo consultant, and it cost like, I don't know, I think I spent like $8,000 for the year on this.
That much. Wow.
And it was at a time where I knew this was the type of work that was kind of in my portfolio, but I knew that I wanted to go somewhere else. Like, this is where I was, but like, this is the stuff that I wanted to do. But I only had like a handful of these in my portfolio. So in my mind, like, I knew where I wanted to get to, but my portfolio said otherwise. So, I spent all this time kind of like arguing with a consultant about, where she thought my work where I should be focusing my marketing efforts. Yeah. And I had kind of a different perception of that. So I guess suggestion number one would be don't kind of put yourself in the situation where you're starting to market yourself or paying to market yourself in a direction that you don't want to go, because then you're going to get kind of pigeonholed into that market. Or if you do decide to kind of switch things up, then you've sort of wasted all of that money and that time and effort.
Yeah.
I think the other thing would be valuable for first time or for kind of first year business owners is don't be afraid to market yourself right away, but make sure that you are strategic, and that, kind of tied to the last thing, make sure the stuff that you are marketing is stuff that you want to shoot and kind of the route that you want to go down. I definitely fell into I want to fit into the Portland market, which is sports and commercial stuff. So like, that's what I should be shooting because that's where the market is, where I'm here. And then I had kind of this identity crisis because I'm like, I'm not a sports and fitness lifestyle photographer. I like conceptual fashion and bordering on commercials. So I was like shooting all of this stuff and trying to market all this stuff that wasn't really stuff that I wanted to do. But I felt like in order to make money, this is what I have to shoot.
Oh, that's such a common feeling, and it is such a mistake photographers make, and yeah, this idea that I have to chase the marketplace rather than like kind of create my work and let the marketplace kind of find me.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, it was a particularly detrimental thing because I was a photographer in a much more competitive field now. Like Portland has much more ad work than Philly did. And it was all focused on, we got Nike and Adidas and Intel here. So it was all, fitness, lifestyle, corporate stuff. But everyone who's in town is shooting for those clients, right? So now you're the new person that's trying to compete with everyone that's been doing it for years, rather than focusing on something that makes you unique and different. And so you know, I think kind of the first couple of years was me figuring out that I didn't have to conform to Portland because I was fighting a losing battle, and I wasn't going to get hired to do that type of work because A, I didn't want to do it, and B, there were plenty of other photographers that aesthetically fit that scene much better than I could have. And so finally I sort of recognized that and realized that, you know, I'll just do the stuff that I want to do, and the work will follow as long as I do put it out there and market it.
Is that naive? Okay, part of that is very wise, not to chase the marketplace. Is it naive to assume that if I do it and I like it, then the market will find me?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is naive.
Yeah. I mean, if you do it, the market will follow you if you put it out there. And if you're putting that work in, like if you're getting it in front of the right people, you know, if I'm pitching the stuff that I want to shoot to the brands in town that want something else, no, that's not going to work. If I'm creating this type of work that I want to do and just post it on Instagram thinking that big brands are going to come to me, that's not going to work either. Right. So it becomes about curating this sort of network and list of people that you have to like literally send emails with your work and the, you know, the content that you've created. Otherwise, you know, you can create the best stuff in the world, but if no one sees it, then it's not going to get you any work.
Yeah, you have to get it in front of a welcome audience, and you have to do the research to figure out who that welcome audience is, who's going to get this, and who's going to understand it. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, this is just kind of examples of earlier work in Portland, which is like, I'm trying to be fashion and I'm trying to be fitness, and you know, it's okay, but it's not really anything that I'm really interested in shooting. So
some of it is starting to hint.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. Like it's creeping in or something.
Yeah. And so, and that's the thing, right? It was like, let's get through these. Yeah. So, and that was the thing is like, okay, well, I'm shooting fitness. I don't love fitness and I'm not going to be able to shoot it in this like lifestyle aesthetic, but how can I make it so that it is something that's fun and interesting to me? So again, circling back to that like lighting on location stuff. And it's like, okay, there's this cool old gym that's been around since the 30s in Portland. And it like has these old vintage dumbbell like equipment and machines that are still there and still in use. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to make this as me. I'm going to make fitness, but Kate style, and make it feel cinematic and make it feel kind of vintage and start kind of incorporating the elements into that are true to me, but still kind of bridging that gap between what the market here is and what I like to shoot. So like sticking with more of that like cinematic or vintage tones.
Right.
Same thing with this shoot, found this old boxing gym. And then, you know, again, this is more like cinematic quality stuff and it's still like fitness, but it has a fashion quality to it.
Yes. So
at this point, it was just finding a way to bridge that gap and morph from what does the local market want? How do I make it me? And then from there on, I had a couple like personal projects. Like this is a favorite of mine where it's like, I just want to do something that's just totally me. And it's not about the client work at this point. It's just, I'm going to have fun with something. And I wanted to do something that felt like a movie stills. And, you know, got this model who I'd done a test shoot, like a sports test shoot with. I thought she had this great, like, little house on the prairie vibe. Bought this vintage dress and we went out during wildflower season and kind of shot this whole series specifically to create this kind of cinematic vibe. And this was interesting to me because I didn't intend it to be an editorial piece or a narrative piece, but I found that after kind of going through all of the images, if I kind of put these together sequentially, it almost had a narrative quality to it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it felt like a series of images rather than just kind of a bunch of different shots from a session, which
Oh, these are beautiful. Oh,
which got me to thinking about the whole idea of like, I could create a narrative series, like a group of pictures that is intended to tell a story in the right sequence.
yeah.
And then this series is kind of what kicked that off.
Oh, this one is very beautiful and is
Thank you.
your work. You know what I mean? Like suddenly it's yours 100%, I think.
Yeah, well, and this was my only light source for the entire shoot. I had this kind of nightgown and 2 other dresses and a hat that I got at a local thrift store. I think each dress was maybe $20 each. So you're talking like probably $100 total for this whole shoot, including the gas and the burgers that we got on the way home. So very, very cheap.
There's an amazing location though. You're ignoring.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah. So having grown up on the East Coast, the whole idea of like this Western frontier was like really fascinating to me. And about 2 hours from Portland, there's a place kind of on the north side of the Washington or the Columbia River Gorge on the Washington side. It's this old farmstead that was built around the time of frontier settlement, and it's in this kind of local park. And I had been out there hiking a couple weeks prior to that during wildflower season, and saw these kind of wildflowers in this park. But as I was going through, we saw, you know, all these buildings and stuff too, and I was like, oh, that could be cool, a cool location for a photo shoot. And so we got out here with like, I think we did this whole thing in under an hour, because we got out, we had to kind of cut out of work, drive out to this location. We got there about an hour before sunset and had a very short window of time to actually shoot it all.
Yeah.
But we had kind of this great kind of golden hour quality of light for the whole thing. Yeah, and I just kind of happened across the location this time around. This is Mount Hood in the background of this image here.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah. No, but it's a good point, because location scouting is something that I've really taken such joy in as a photographer. It's like a huge part of the process, and oftentimes I will just be inspired for a shoot from a cool location that I see. So yeah, that's a really kind of important part of the process for me.
You know, it's interesting also that it feels like a story rather than a bunch of pictures of a model.
Yeah, yeah.
And then again, let me ask my class, why do these look like, what makes it feel like a story rather than, oh, here's some shots of a model?
Well, the scenery and the lighting.
That, absolutely. Can you go through the little series again, Kate?
Sure. Go backwards, that's okay.
Yeah.
For me, I feel, I don't know how to put it, but like if I want to do like an environmental portrait where I'm specifically telling a story of a person, I want them to make that connection to the camera. The fact that the model's never making the connection to the camera it makes it feel less like they're posing for a photo, but more like the viewer's just looking on at something that's actually happening, which to me makes it feel more like a narrative.
Yeah,
that's short, like not looking directly at the camera.
Yeah, like I think it makes it feel like, oh, someone's telling a story and we're watching someone, and it's not like in a movie, you're watching someone lead their life. Unless it's something where they're breaking the fourth wall, they're not looking at the camera and introducing themselves. This image right here, I really, really love, the one where she's walking away, because it has that commercial polish and that attention to detail and the location and the wardrobe, but still, you know, yeah, there's nothing crass or commercial about it at all, you know. I would think that this picture opened doors for you to some degree. You know what I mean? It has it.
It's hard to say, really. I mentioned about marketing early on in your career, and it's something that I didn't do particularly well to start. But this series did get picked up by Suzanne Cicet, a photo editor.
Oh yeah.
Last year, I think, after it had been on my site for 3 years at this point. And I think it takes a while for that momentum to build, and we don't always have a good sense for what triggers interest in things, which is always the challenge of marketing in general, right? You can put stuff out there and someone will see it 3 years after the fact and, contact you about something similar. I mean, in general, my commercial career has picked up in the last couple years. And this along with a couple other projects have been released in more kind of higher exposure blogs or publications. So I think it's just kind of a cumulative awareness of my work, but this was really the first kind of narrative piece that I've done, and since then that's been a significant focus of my work. So this piece has kind of driven me in a direction that's much more narrative, and since then I have been hired for or asked to bid on projects that are in that more narrative vein.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Yeah, no, it has that like storytelling quality to it where it's all in there.
Yeah. And so, this was kind of like, oh, this is something I could work with. And so this kind of inspired this next story, which is a series called War Widow, which is one of my favorite narratives I've created because I really wanted to make it feel like a series of events. So if you think about like watching a movie, if you pause the movie at kind of like the salient points, you should in theory be able to get like, a set number of stills that's going to tell the whole story frame by frame.
Yeah.
And this is something that I want to kind of create with this series. So it's basically, this guy comes to deliver the news to this woman that her husband died. And it's sort of ambiguous time period, but the location was built in the 30s and their styling is more like 40s, 50s. So we can call it, World War II-esque. But the story is less about, the historical aspect and more about kind of her moments of solitude and grief and how she copes with this. Here she's just kind of out of it and she's over pouring her tea, and here she's setting kind of her table and putting her husband's placeholder image in the seat. Going through basically every kind of range of emotion, denial or shock or, just grief or whatever. But really trying to sort of convey that all throughout a set of images and in a way that has kind of at least a sort of linear quality. Bribed a friend's kids for this photo shoot.
Wait, what'd you say?
I bribed a friend's kids for this photo shoot.
They had to get dressed and everything.
They did.
Question.
I love shooting kids because they're really, you just give them a prop or give them like a story and they just like love to just hop into character. So. Oh
yeah. Oh, this is really beautiful. I don't think I've seen this series before or as many images from it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. And it was also, it was utilizing kind of the features of this. It was an Airbnb or a B&B that we rented a room for the night basically. And they gave us access to the whole house to shoot for a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Do that. Talk to B&Bs and hotels and Airbnbs and Burbos. And if a lot of times people will trade for just images of the space if they needed updated interior photos. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a really good way to get access into a space. Mm-hmm. Or, Sometimes you can just pay for an evening or two and they'll let you use it. Obviously, it's going to depend on the owner, but I've had a lot of success with just asking people who rent out properties if they would be amenable to photo shoots.
Mm-hmm. So you're doing all your own wardrobe for this?
This one I had a friend's style. I actually met my stylist through a thrift store. It was my first week in Portland. I grabbed some clothes from the store for a photo shoot. And as I was checking out, I happened to just ask, I was like, does anyone here do styling for shoots? And she was like, I do. So we kind of started our careers in Portland together. And she's actually, I'm going to have some of my team come on to my class next Tuesday to sort of chat about working together as a team. So she'll be on there. But yeah, we just kind of met coincidentally, and she's done a lot of my styling work for me.
So then your main character here is an actress, and like because you're asking a lot of her, really,
Yeah, I can't remember if she was signed. I think she might have been signed with one of the acting agencies in town. But I met her on Instagram, and she'd shot with some other Portland photographers that I knew, and had shot, I think, with the hairstylist before. So I kind of found her that way, and she in some ways was kind of a big part of the inspiration for the shoot, because I feel like her aesthetic is so kind of classic 40s, 50s look.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is really important too, is, especially when I'm doing these shoots that are more nostalgically inclined, having the right aesthetic with my model. I mean, the styling and hair and makeup is important, but if the model has the right look for a particular era, that can go so far.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And I will definitely see models and kind of look at them and be like, you look like you belong in this era. And I will design a photo shoot around them, set in a particular, time period or style, because that's what I think they're most suited for. And I like to think that everyone is photogenic and they have a story that will suit them. But not everyone is the right fit for every story. I do strongly believe that, matching the aesthetic with the narrative is really important.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, you had an eccentric model there delivering the letter with the cheekbones and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was interesting. Hey, there's a bunch of questions in here, and I thought that when you get to a good stopping point, it might be a good idea for me to ask you some of these questions.
Well, now sounds like a great time, so.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Here is one from Grace. What details do you believe make the best photographs? How do you go about focusing on them in your work? And then what is the one thing you wish you knew when you started taking photos?
The details that I focus on, that's a great question. It's hard because I think that every aspect of a photo shoot should be given weight and significance. And I think the really successful images pay attention to all of those things, and they focus on all of those things, and those details aren't left out, no matter how small they are. So yeah, it's hard to say kind of which is the best, but I think for me, since a lot of my stuff is focused on more kind of emotional issues, that having someone who can express emotion and emote and give you kind of the body language and the facial expressions that you need, because if you're trying to portray a certain emotion and you can't get that from your model, then the whole thing is going to fall flat.
Yeah.
But I do feel like if you can get that, then that might be might kind of overpower everything else in the scene, or at least kind of diminish any pitfalls. And then what was the second part? Something I learned, or I wish I'd learned when I started photography.
Well, what's the one thing you wish you knew when you started making photographs?
Good question.
I mean, it ties into that idea where you talked about mistakes that we make. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I wish that I kind of had the confidence to just put myself out there early on, rather than trying to be such a perfectionist and wait until my portfolio and body of work was perfect.
Yeah.
Before starting to find work, because you'll never get there if that's what you're looking for.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's probably the best response I have for you.
No, that's wise. That's wise. A question from Violetta. As someone who's struggling to figure out what their photography style is, would you say you found what makes your photography different than everybody else's?
Sometimes I do. I think at this point, I'm fairly confident in my aesthetic consistency, but at the same time, I'm always trying to push boundaries and do something different. And I feel like every photo shoot is me kind of reinventing the wheel. I used to be really worried about making my stuff look consistent, but I think what I found is that through my workflow and my process and the way that I kind of do things, it's something that it just kind of happens just based on how I approach things. And it's not something I think about consciously so much. It's just something that has developed because I've just been doing it for, X amount of years. And so that process of, whether it's like staging or lighting or post-processing, all of that kind of results in something that is very stylistically me. And I know that that's a challenge, right? Because everyone wants to figure out what the formula is to create their own style and be able to identify what that is and how to replicate it. But I think it's something that the longer you do it, it's just going to come naturally.
I believe that. I think when you're young, you're trying very hard to make decisions that you think will lead to a style. And I think as you do it more, all those little decisions end up kind of delivering you a style or something like that.
Yeah.
You don't think about it as much.
No, it's a lot more subconscious. That being said, I do think, kind of that style exercise I talked about in the beginning of identifying what really draws you to photography and the things that you kind of keep coming back to. If you can kind of hone in on that and focus on that and be deliberate when you do create new work, that's going to sort of streamline that process a bit for you.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. The question here is, how do you overcome that fear to put yourself out there before you feel your work is good enough?
I'll tell you when I get there.
How do you break that perfectionism?
I think it's so hard in a day like today where you have so much exposure to really talented photographers and high quality work. But I always have to come back to the people that I feel like are just like crushing it in the business world. And I know that stylistically, like I'm stronger than they are. And the only difference between me and them is the amount of hustle and the amount of work that they put out there for the world to consume and to get hired, right? And so as much as we'd like to believe that our value is from our skill, the reality is a lot of value comes from just putting yourself out there. And once you're at kind of a certain threshold of quality, how much better you are than someone else is really not as important as how much you are working to put yourself out there. So I think kind of just coming back to that idea that like, you're never gonna be as good as you want yourself to be, but that doesn't matter in terms of like the business world. You're already where you need to be business wise if you're putting yourself out there. So try to, like, as much as we're in our own heads as photographers and we're so critical of our own work, as much as you can kind of divorce the idea of your technical abilities and your marketing or your business capabilities, I think the saner you'll stay and the better you'll be able to run your business, because they're two kind of different things that are loosely tied together. But at the end of the day, you know, being a photographer and being a business person are sort of two kind of different things.
Oh, for sure. For sure. There was a friend of mine said, the problem with photographers is that they feel like if a photo's not, if they made a photo that sucked, they suck. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like, I mean, they suck as a person, and they are the failure of a human, and that it's all these things that are so internalized, you know.
Definitely.
And that there was a certain level of photographer who was able to like just laugh at that and be like, oh, it's just a photo, and then there's these other things, and success doesn't really always equal the artistic merit of a given photographer's work, or you know.
No. No, I mean, as much as I wish it were otherwise, there's a lot of truth to that.
Oh, for sure. How do you overcome creative block? And that was from Lily Perkins.
So I'm very fortunate in that I don't really get blocked creatively too often. My blockages lie elsewhere. I always have a million things I want to shoot, but two things that I can recommend is, one is keep an inspiration journal. So anytime you're inspired by anything, like literally anything, if you're inspired by like the color of the bird that's sitting outside my window, or you're inspired by a movie that you saw, or you saw like a cool photo from another photographer or another artist, put it on a mood board or put it in an inspiration journal. And that way, when you're in a funk, you can always go back to that journal or to that mood board and look up all these ideas for inspiration you had previously. So that way, like maybe you can't come up with an idea today for a shoot, but you have, you know, weeks of other ideas that you've listed before. So maybe that'll kind of spark something in your head and get the creative juices flowing.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is sometimes you should shoot when you don't want to. Like schedule a test shoot or creative shoot, even if you're in a funk, and force yourself to do something creative, because sometimes just the act of going through it will help kind of inspire you and reignite that fire.
Cool, thank you. I'll keep all that in mind.
Sure thing.
That was good advice. Yeah, I am a believer that motivation is overrated. You know what I mean? Like that you should treat it like you're just going to the work at like making submarine sandwiches or something like that. You know?
Yeah, I mean it's very important and not important at all, depending on what you're doing, right? Like if you're doing a personal project, I feel like motivation's important, right? Because that personal stuff is about who you are as a photographer. But, you know, I had multiple lookbook shoots this week and I wasn't really motivated to go to any of them, but it was a job and I had to show up. So I think kind of getting into the habit of doing things despite your motivation is important just to get through life.
I buy that. I guess everyone kind of creates differently, but I guess I'm a believer that those good ideas come from just doing sometimes, you know what I mean? As opposed to sitting back and thinking, well, I'm going to brainstorm and then I'm going to get an idea in my head or something. But I think everybody works differently. Some people do, you know, kind of gain something from that.
Well, and brainstorming is great, but at the end of the day, you have to execute. So, you know, that's an important thing to keep in mind too. You could have all these creative ideas, but if you don't actually put them into action, then you won't have anything to show for it.
Yes, yes. A couple kind of technical questions here. Michael Chan asks, how often do you pull frequency separation in retouching skin? And I myself don't know what that is.
It was like a technique that one of our Photoshop classes made us do, where you like separate the highs and the lows on 2 different layers, and it makes like retouching skin way easier. And I just can't figure out if it's worth getting really into.
Don't do it.
Okay.
No, I don't use it. When I started doing it, and I got really not great visual results. You know, at the end of the day, a tool's a tool. It's not good, it's not evil, it's just a way to do things. And I think there's, you know, a time and place for certain tools, but I think it's one of those tools that's very often abused and rarely looks the way that it should. And I find that if you work with a good team and you work with a model and a makeup artist that are high caliber, then your need to do that and put a lot of intense work into skin retouching is much, much less than if you worked with kind of a subpar crew. So I do like kind of a skin cleanup layer, and then for all like blemishes and stuff, and then I'll do kind of micro dodge and burn to address the skin inconsistencies. So it's kind of the longhand approach, but in the end, I think it looks a lot better. And the more you do it, you get a lot faster at it.
That's fair. Shane had a question here. Are you a member of any photography associations, and what are your thoughts, experience with them?
I think I'm a member of PPA just to get the insurance benefits.
Not a joiner.
Yeah. No, I don't. Not any professional organizations, but I am involved in a lot of like Facebook photography groups, which is just, you know, it's a nice way to kind of like see what other people are doing and get inspired and get critique and give critique. And some are better than others. Some are more, have higher caliber quality stuff than others. I teach through ProEDU, so they have an online community that's pretty good, and I think the quality of work in that group is pretty substantial, and it's a good vibe too, which is nice. But yeah, as far as professional organizations, I have been to a couple like APA events in LA, which are pretty good. But Portland doesn't really have much of a local scene for that. And yeah, I've just kind of focused on the online world.
Yeah, that's fair. Question from Randy. How did you learn about color theory? Was it more trial and error, or did you study color theory specifically? Can you recommend any resources for learning?
Yeah, so color theory, I think part of it was from just doing a lot of drawing and painting in school. And then a lot through the trial and error of paint colors on my walls in my house. I think, you know, I can't what's the word I'm looking for? I learned a lot from that process, which I didn't think I had, but looking back on it, I think a lot of it came from that. But in terms of like retouching photo, like color grading, I think it was predominantly trial and error. I learned a lot from the works of like Johannes Itten, who kind of wrote the main theory of color, main treatise on color theory, and talks about like contrast in color and different color harmonies and that kind of stuff. As far as resources go, not to totally plug myself, but I do have a class through ProEDU on the science of color, which is focused on kind of the more like theory parts of it. It's less into the whole like application in Photoshop stuff, but I think having the fundamentals and like the basic knowledge of color theory and different color harmonies is really important. But in terms of application in my own work, it's been mostly trial and error.
Oh, it's a good answer. That makes sense. Let's continue where we were.
Yeah. Where was I? This is a presentation from when I was gabbing on about myself in my first class, but just talking about kind of my inspirations. Gregory Crutzen is a huge inspiration of mine, or at least he was kind of at the beginning of my career. Now everyone tells me that my stuff looks like Crutzen, and I'm like, I don't want to look like Crutzen. I want to look like Kate Woodman, but.
Oh, I wouldn't say that your stuff looks like his now. I mean, is this yours or his? I don't know.
This is his.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the way you paired it with that previous series, you could see more of a connection or something like that. But.
Yeah. But Crutzen was kind of like my introduction into conceptual photography. And so, you know, the narrative stuff that I was doing was like, okay, I want to tie this into like cinematography, but then it was like, okay, I want to start getting into conceptual work. And what does that mean? Which is a hard question to answer. I'd actually be interested in hearing from you guys what your kind of take on what conceptual photography means, because I think it has sort of a wide interpretation.
Oh, let's try.
I think that it's when you have multiple elements within an image that fits together to create a cohesive one.
Okay, I buy that.
Hi, Kate. For me, conceptual, or what I would aspire my images to be conceptual, would be something that is simple yet powerful in the way that it gives you a story without having to have a whole bunch of stuff in it.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a story, but you like walk in the middle of it and you don't really know what's going on, so you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. I think that to me is kind of like the best. Go ahead.
So that way, it's something that could be interpreted based on your own experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, abstract enough to be interpreted, maybe.
Right. Yeah, it's like, to me, it's about finding that balance of like the artist has kind of their perspective and maybe they have an idea of what the story is, but they leave it ambiguous enough that the viewer can also kind of come up with their own interpretation, and that interpretation might be different based on their personal experiences.
Right, because I feel that can reach much more wider audience.
Yeah. And I think I'm drawn to that kind of stuff because it sort of makes you sit and look and digest an image. You know, it can't really be taken at face value. And especially in today's day and age with like everything, you just scroll right through and you look at it for 0.3 seconds and, you know, it's just content overload. It's really refreshing to get to, like, I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed and I get to an image and it just stops me in my tracks. And it's like, whoa, what? Like, it captures you immediately visually, but then the more you look at it, the more you want to look at it because there's something compelling about it and there's something that you kind of have to figure out. And so that is, I think, ultimately what I'm trying to do with my images. And if I can get you to spend like 10 seconds looking at it versus 1 second, then to me it's a successful image. And that involves just incorporating a lot of like details that maybe you wouldn't pick up the first time, but maybe the second time you see something and then the third time you'd see something else.
Right.
These are just a couple of Crudsen's images. And you can probably see like similarities in terms of like compositionally, it's pretty wide, so he includes a lot of the space, a lot of its interiors. There's definitely color to bring out certain kind of emotions or you know, certain vibes of an image.
Oh, and the nostalgia and the attention to the old props or trying to set a scene for a certain time period.
Yeah, definitely. The thing about Crutzen is that he spends hundreds of thousands of dollars on his sets, and often builds these sets from scratch. There's one particular shot that he did with a house on fire and literally hired the fire department to light this house on fire for the shot so he could capture it in camera, which is awesome, but I don't have those kind of budgets, unfortunately. So I have to make do with something slightly less opulent. So this is a series that was kind of my first attempt at conceptual. And my stylist happened to have a fire suit at her disposal, which why not? Doesn't everybody? And so I was like, well, clearly we have to shoot something with this. I don't know what I'm going to shoot, but I have to shoot something. And so I had this idea of like, she's in a fire suit, something needs to be on fire. Let's have this juxtaposition of like her in the fire suit, just like, okay, that's her protection. And she's going to be totally like in denial of an actual fire that's happening.
Right.
So I found this RV that was for sale on Craigslist, emailed the realtor and was like, can we come in for like 2 hours and take some photos? She was like, sure, why not? Bought this chair on like Craigslist for like $25, grabbed a couple like props that we had lying around our house. This TV was like $10 at a antique shop. And we just like brought all of this into the space and created this little vignette of this TV being on fire, and she's just sitting there like pretending everything's fine. It's like the meme of like the dog that's in the room everything's on fire. Yeah. And to me, this was like kind of a political commentary, because I think we shot this in like 2017. If you can see kind of on the stack of magazines, the top is like the Time cover that Nadav Kander did of Donald Trump. And it was just a time where everything felt like kind of like politically tumultuous. Little do we know how much that was gonna change over the last 3 years, but in some ways this feels more poignant now than it did at the time.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so we just did these few images here.
Oh, that's the same place right there?
Yeah, so this is the exterior of the building and this is inside.
Oh, the outside and the inside are pretty ideal for your purposes, really.
Yeah, exactly. But what was so interesting to me about this concept was that a lot of people interpreted this as a piece about climate change, even though to me it was more of like a political thing. But I never really expressed that when I put it out there into the world. And in the last few months between, you know, like the riots and BLM stuff and Corona stuff and election stuff, it's kind of like, wow, this is hitting close to home, which is, to me, it feels like none of that feels good, but like the series in a way, like capturing that and having it still kind of have a, you know, being rooted and being relevant today, to me is like an indication that it's a good set of images, because it transcends this kind of one particular moment in time and is applicable in various incarnations. So yeah, I like this set. And I think it was, you know, a pretty successful first attempt at trying something on the more conceptual side.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely successful. It's different than your other work, though. It seems like it has a more specific message, where your work seems more fantasy and enigmatic and less political or driven, typically. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because I'm not a particularly confrontational person, but I do want people to think about things. So trying to find the balance of how can I present work that has kind of a message that sort of maybe nudges you in one direction, but isn't like a clear statement of my political or social or religious stance,
Yeah.
but rather just kind of a reflection of the climate. And I do have some more images that are more in that vein, and perhaps they're more kind of cleverly disguised as something that feels more in the fantasy realm. Like I don't think I have it on here, but I have a shot on my website of I did like an Adam and Eve kind of role reversal where Eve like pulls a rib out of Adam and she's like eating it like a spare rib, you know, which is obviously like, you know, taking religious allegory and kind of spinning that on its head. Yes. But it still is very like fine art, fashion-y aesthetically. Right. And so I think it kind of, you know, kind of escapes the criticism of people in that regard by kind of disguising it as something else. So yeah. And it's hard to find that balance between something that's like an obvious message and something that's more ambiguous. There is kind of this fine line, and sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm less successful, but I just kind of keep trying.
Oh yeah. So this project here, it looks like this is all natural light, or are you augmenting the light a little bit? Because it feels natural. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to remember. I think it is all natural light. The fire in here is composited, but the rest of it I think is just natural light. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And then the front yard is as well.
Yeah.
Did you composite the fire yourself?
Yeah.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is like, you know, I had done some basic composite stuff, which was like, you know, extending backgrounds and maybe like a head swap in a portrait before. But this was kind of my start into more complex composite elements. And in fact...
So would you consider yourself a professional retoucher at this point? Like, would you be able to say it amongst professionals?
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Yeah, I do all of my own retouching. I have retouched for other photographers, and I think I'm pretty well versed in the retouching components and what goes into that. So I would say so. Some of my high-end retouching friends might smack me on the hand for that, but I don't know. I think yeah, I guess I'd be comfortable saying that. But composite was kind of the way for me to sort of bridge the gap between the landscape stuff that I had been shooting years ago, and now I had the skill set to kind of light people in studio, and now I had conceptual interest. So it's like, how do I put all these three together? And so, you know, I kind of had this time to revisit previous landscape images that I had taken, and then started kind of incorporating people into them. And at first it was like this kind of basic stuff here where it was like landscape and then person. Two separate elements, pretty basic. The only thing that I had to worry about so much was just making sure I got the right perspective and the right lighting on the person. But then gradually it got more complex and the scenes kind of became built up of different parts and whatnot. I mean, it's kind of an awesome tool because it allows you to access places that you wouldn't normally access, or it allows you to incorporate things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So like this is an aquarium that they allow photography, but not flash photography. And I couldn't bring a model in there. And even if I could, I would get all these reflections on the glass, but I can shoot this kid in my studio at home and comp him in. And now, you know, it fits together kind of seamlessly. Oh, yeah. So I did this. Yeah, same thing. Like it was a morning like this morning where it was super foggy, which happens often enough around here, but not so often that you can predict it. And so I got up like super early and went down the street to this gas station, like to get this kind of cool, like foggy scene. But it wasn't like I could call up a model at 4 o'clock in the morning and be like, hey, you need to get down here right now. We're going to do this thing. So I photographed her in studio later, and was able to, well, twice, and was able to put her in the scene kind of playing both of these characters. So it kind of opens up some doors creatively as well.
That's tricky light to try to copy in a studio there. You know what I mean?
It is.
Light.
Well, and I think that's kind of where the engineering part comes into play, because at the end of the day, they're both creative problem solving. The techniques are different, but you still have a problem that you have to solve, and you have to figure out kind of how to work around it and how to fix it. And so in something like this, right, you know what the lighting is in the background. You know you have this kind of harsh directional overhead light, and you know the direction it's coming from, and then you know you have kind of a diffused fill from the fog. So if you're able to kind of understand what those elements are and reverse engineer what the lighting scenario is, then you can, if you have the right tools, you can recreate it in studio, and you can put the light where it needs to be to mimic the light here, and you can bring in a fog machine to give that kind of hazy effect.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, and color matching this stuff sometimes can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But with time and practice, it gets much more manageable, and it opens up a lot of doors.
I mean, this one's got a lot of different light sources, though, which is the reason, it like.
Yeah.
The gas station, it's got the high light, and then the light that's way up high, and then there's one from the behind, and then there's one, there's a lot of things going on there.
Definitely. And you can kind of cheat it too. Once you get more proficient at it, you can kind of cheat the light sources. Like the girl in front, if she'd actually been in the scene, she probably wouldn't be as well lit as she is here.
Right.
But because we have the light in enough of the right direction, we can add a little bit more fill to the front just to put more emphasis on her. And it's kind of close enough to the ambient light in the scene that our eye is tricked into believing that it's real.
Yeah, right. No, I buy that.
Or you can create landscapes that don't exist.
Wait, did someone have a question?
Yes, please. Kate, what background do you use to make the selection easier especially on complicated garments and hair?
How to do the selection?
No. What background? What kind of background?
Yeah. So for this one, I put her on a gray backdrop. Particularly because if you can kind of see on the girl in front, her skirt is kind of sheer. So I wanted something that matched the background or the back plate enough that I wasn't going to have to like do crazy hue saturation adjustments to like take her from a green screen to the color that it is here. So using that gray just seemed to make the most sense. The gray was also nice for the rain jacket because it added some contrast. If we put her on white, then selecting her out would have been maybe a little bit more of a challenge. It really just kind of depends on your model and your styling and the lighting too, but try to be conscious of of having contrast. The more contrast you can have between your model and the background, the easier it's going to be to kind of select and mask them out and cut them out accordingly.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so how did you create this?
This was a lot of trial and error with color in Photoshop. I think I had the shots of her first. which is rare. Usually I work the other way around and I have a backplate first and then I try to match my lighting to the background. But because we shot her in studio first and we're going for more of kind of like a stylized look, I figured I would just worry about making the background later because I knew it was going to be like over the top and unrealistic anyway. So matching the lighting was less critical. So to create the background, I just grabbed a couple shots of these rocks, which I think are from, some of them are from like Death Valley and some are from Smith Rock here in Oregon. And then different skies from various places too. And this was really just a game of like, how do I bring the colors and tie them into what her color palette is? So I knew I wanted to incorporate some of the, like the reds in the sky from like her, the top of her outfit, and then the blues into the background. So it was really just about like cranking up saturation and using like a bunch of different like blend modes and different color layers to really like amp up the color in this one.
Wow, that really worked.
Yeah, and it took a long time to like, and a lot of like false starts and dead ends. So don't think that I'm the person that like knows immediately what the color is going to be and how to get there perfectly. Like, no, it takes a long time and it takes trial and error in a lot of situations. And I think that's, you know, that's something that makes teaching color a challenge because it's not formulaic and it is a very different process for each image, depending on where you want to go with it. So, again, I think it's just about trial and error and experimenting with different things and playing around with different blend modes and layers and that sort of thing. And some things I've learned just through sheer accident.
I mean, this picture, I mean, the styling and the wardrobe and what it references is very fascinating and is the payoff. But to me, when I saw it as like such this dominant picture on your website initially, it's all about the color, I think. You know what I mean? Those colors say things. They say something like a record album from that era. Oh, it triggers a lot of stuff. And I don't just mean the red in the sky. I mean like the blue that's on her cheeks and in her hair, and then the yellow that's in the hair that's underneath, and the different colors of the reflections. Like they all really say something, you know?
Yeah, well, and that wasn't, the color was not the focus of this going into the shoot, but somehow in the retouching process, it always seems to come back to that as a focus for me.
Yeah.
To like when we started, this was all just about creating that like 60s sexy space girl thing. You know, it's very referential in terms of that. But then I knew like it's me, so I'm gonna put color in this. And it was just a question of how.
Yeah, no, it really comes together. I mean, there was a retoucher who I worked with in San Francisco who I was always impressed with him, and he could make like a rag in a gas station look like a blue, and you knew what that blue meant. And it was a blue, you know, there would be power and storytelling in that color. And I thought this one did that too. You know what I mean? That awareness of color, that you don't know how to say it till you see it, you know?
Well, yeah, and color has a very powerful emotive quality in general. And I think having an understanding of that in the pre-production aspect is really important too, because then you can kind of plan accordingly, and you can use color for symbolism, you can use color for emotive expression purposes, and you can be very deliberate with it. And then, you know, if you've done kind of the work in the beginning and the pre-production, then it's a lot less work on the post-production end of things, because you've already kind of done what you needed to do.
Right. Did you shoot this in your living room?
Yes.
Did it really? Did it really?
I did. Yeah, this is like an $8 toy from Amazon. It lights up. It's pretty great. The suit, I think, this whole project was like a buy and return from Amazon nightmare, but the belt was like a Superman or a Batman belt that we got. It was a kid's toy. And then, yeah, the suit, Amazon, the gloves, Amazon. The helmet was like a lantern, like an exterior lantern light fixture bulb made of like plastic. And so I had to, you can see the bottom of it is not quite, it's a little jagged because I had to sawzall it open so it would actually fit over her head.
So it really did go over her head. I mean, that really is like on someone?
Oh yeah, yeah. And luckily we had this amazing wig, because if she didn't have the wig on, it would have like just rocked back and forth the whole time, but the wig just kind of like props it up perfectly. So one of those like perfect, fortunate coincidences. So
proportions. Wow. Wow. No, that's great. So this is something you just did for yourself. You wanted to do this and did it.
Yeah, this is actually kind of a joint collaboration project between myself and my makeup artist. I think we share a lot of similar aesthetic interests, which is why she's so great to work with, because we can we're always like kind of on the same page. And you know, I give her free reign to kind of do what she wants, because I know that her caliber of work is so high, and I know that she can just execute something that's really tasteful. But we also just have a lot of similar interests. So she was like, she sent me kind of a reference image that was very, very, very loosely related to this, and we just kind of put our own spin on it.
So great. So great. That idea of working with your team over time, and some of the images, they have a louder voice than you, and then some you have a louder voice than them. And the idea of you guys knowing each other and being able to make this kind of music together, those are really valuable when those things can kind of happen, you know. Definitely.
I mean, I can't stress enough how important it is to have good people to work with, people that you trust, people that you enjoy spending time with. You know, my makeup artist is like one of my best friends too. So it's really nice that we've been able to kind of develop that relationship. And it just, especially with personal projects, which I think are so important anyway to do and to create, you want to do it and you want to have fun doing it. So that a lot of that fun aspect is just surrounding yourself with the type of people that are gonna really get the most out of your project. And same with the models. Like, you don't want to work with models who are just worried about, you know, getting paid for a personal project. You want someone that's like collaborative, and they're into the concept and they're gonna have fun.
Yeah, for sure. That's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I don't know if I have too much more after this. These are just kind of some examples of more recent work, where I started getting into, you know, more conceptual stuff. This was kind of a fashion play on gender roles and role reversals and stuff.
Yeah.
This was shot actually at my makeup artist in her garage. On her birthday. We decided to do a photo shoot on her birthday and turn it into this, like, you know, noir pulp fiction kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So, you know, I wanted to be wary of your time too. And we had talked about you, if you had time for it, looking at some of the students' work. And is that something you still feel you still have time for? So what I think we should do is, why don't we all take a break now and come back, and then we'll look at the student work. Is that cool with everybody?
Perfect.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. You want to take a 15-minute break? Is that working?
Yep, it's fine.
Sounds good.
All right. So we'll come back in 15 minutes. All right. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Kate. That was wonderful.